First, the hardware store door burst open with a frantic jingle, and a small boy no older than 8 stumbled inside, tears carving clean paths down his dusty cheeks. "Please, somebody help! They hurt my grandpa!" he cried, his voice cracking as he pointed desperately toward the parking lot. Outside, under the harsh afternoon sun of a quiet Arizona town called Dusty Ridge, an elderly man lay crumpled on the hot asphalt between 2 parked cars. His worn cowboy hat had rolled away, his cane snapped in 2 beside him, and in the distance the roar of a fleeing truck faded into the desert wind. It was supposed to be a simple Saturday. Thomas Harlan, a 74-year-old retired Navy veteran who had served in Desert Storm, had promised his grandson, 8-year-old Lucas, a trip to buy materials for the treehouse they'd been dreaming about all summer. Lucas bounced excitedly in the passenger seat of Thomas's old Ford pickup, clutching a hand-drawn blueprint covered in crayon markings. "Grandpa, do you think we can make it 2 stories?" Lucas asked, his bright green eyes shining with hope. Thomas smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with warmth. "We'll make it 3 if you want, partner, as long as you help with the hammering." Inside the store, the familiar smell of lumber, paint, and coffee wrapped around them like an old blanket. Thomas moved slowly. His knees still ached from old injuries and years of hard work on ranches, but Lucas stayed right by his side, proudly carrying the smaller boards. They laughed about where to put the secret trap door, and Thomas felt younger than he had in decades. They were loading the bed of the truck when 4 young men in a jacked-up black Ram truck pulled in loudly, rap music thumping so hard the ground vibrated. They were in their early 20s, wearing expensive sunglasses and smirks that said they believed the world owed them space. The leader, a tall, muscular guy named Bryce Callahan, son of the wealthiest landowner in Dusty Ridge, stepped out and spat on the ground. "Hey, old man, you're in my spot." Thomas glanced around. There were no painted lines, no signs, just empty spaces all around. "I'll be out of your way in 2 minutes, son," he said calmly, continuing to slide the last plank into place. Bryce kicked the tailgate hard, denting it. "I said move it, Grandpa." Lucas froze, clutching a small bag of nails. "Don't kick our truck." One of Bryce's friends laughed mockingly. "Oh, look, the kid thinks he's tough." Thomas straightened as much as his back allowed, his voice steady but firm. "There's no need for this, we're almost done." But Bryce wasn't looking for reason. He was high on the power his last name gave him in this small town. He stepped forward and shoved Thomas hard in the chest. Thomas's bad knee buckled immediately. He fell backward, his head hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. Blood began to trickle from a cut above his eye. "Grandpa!" Lucas screamed, dropping everything and running to him. The 4 young men laughed, one of them pulling out his phone to record. "Check this out. Old timer goes down easy." They kicked gravel toward Thomas's motionless form before jumping back into their truck and peeling out, leaving black tire marks and a cloud of dust. Lucas knelt beside his grandfather, shaking him gently. "Grandpa, please wake up. Please." Thomas's eyes fluttered. I'm okay, buddy," he whispered weakly, but the pain in his voice told another story. A store employee rushed out, phone already to her ear, calling 911. Lucas, sobbing uncontrollably, ran back inside the store, begging for help. That moment of cruelty, captured on a bystander's phone, would soon reach people who refused to let it stand. Across town, at a custom motorcycle shop called Desert Thunder Garage, a man named Bear Ramirez was tightening bolts on a Harley when his phone lit up with a text from his cousin, who worked at the hardware store. 4 punks just beat up an old veteran in the parking lot in front of his little grandson. Rich kid Bryce Callahan and his crew. Cops won't do anything. His dad owns the sheriff's campaign. Bear's hands stopped moving. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Marines. The words veteran and grandson hit him like shrapnel. He walked outside where 8 of his brothers from the local chapter of a well-known motorcycle club were working on their bikes, drinking coffee, telling stories. "We've got a problem," Bear said quietly. Within minutes, they all knew the details. And within an hour, phone calls were made across the state. If this story has already touched your heart, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button on Road Motorcycle Diaries. It helps us bring more true stories of courage, loyalty, and the good still left in people. Because what happened next and would change an entire town. The desert wind carried the faint smell of creosote and hot iron as Bear Ramirez stood outside Desert Thunder Garage, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the cracked concrete. His real name was Mateo, but no one had called him that since the Corps. After he carried 3 wounded brothers out of a burning Humvee in Helmand Province, the nickname Bear stuck forever. He stared at the text on his phone again, the words burning hotter than the Arizona sun. An old veteran shoved to the ground, a little boy watching his hero bleed, and the ones responsible walking free because of who their daddy was. Bear's jaw clenched. He looked up at the 8 men around him, rough, tattooed, weathered by life and the road. These weren't outlaws in the Hollywood sense. They were mechanics, welders, fathers, veterans themselves, members of a motorcycle club that most people crossed the street to avoid, but who quietly paid hospital bills for widows, fixed roofs for elderly neighbors, and rode hundreds of miles to escort fallen soldiers home. "We ride for our own," Bear said, his deep voice cutting through the idle chatter. "And today a Navy vet and his grandson just became our own." One by one, heads nodded. No debate. No vote needed. This was the code. Within 20 minutes, phones were out. Calls were made. Texts flew across 3 states. By late afternoon, the first response came from Tucson. 12 bikes confirmed. Then Flagstaff, 9 more. Phoenix chapter, 15 on the way. Word spread like wildfire through the network of riders who lived by loyalty above all else. As the sun began to dip behind the Red Rock Mountains, the sound started. Low, distant, growing. 1 Harley rumble became 5. 5 became 20. 20 became 43. They gathered on the outskirts of Dusty Ridge, engines idling in perfect rows under the fading light. Chrome caught the last rays of sun like flames. Leather vests bore patches earned through years of brotherhood. Respect few, fear none. We take care of our own. Bear stood in front of them, helmet in hand. "Brothers," he called out, voice carrying over the thunder of idling motors. "Today, a 74-year-old veteran named Thomas Harlan was attacked in broad daylight for no reason other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time. His 8-year-old grandson watched it happen. The men who did it think money and a name protect them. They're about to learn different." A low growl of approval rose from the group. "We don't break laws," Bear continued. "We don't start fights, but we don't look away when good men are hurt and children are scared. Tonight, we let Thomas Harlan know he's not alone. Tomorrow, we make sure justice doesn't stay silent." Engines revved in unison, a roar that echoed across the valley like a promise. At Dusty Ridge Community Hospital, Thomas lay in a narrow bed, IV dripping slowly into his arm. The doctor had confirmed 3 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and a deep cut requiring stitches. But the deepest wound wasn't physical. Lucas sat curled in a plastic chair beside him, clutching his grandfather's weathered hand. He hadn't cried since arriving. His tears had run dry, but his small body still trembled every few minutes. "Grandpa," he whispered, "why did they do that? You didn't even say anything mean." Thomas turned his head slowly, wincing. His voice was hoarse but gentle. "Some folks, buddy, they're hurting inside in ways they don't understand. So, they hurt others to feel big, but that doesn't make it right. And it doesn't mean we stop being kind." Lucas looked down. "I was scared I couldn't help you." Thomas squeezed his hand weakly. "You did help me. You ran for help. You stayed with me. That took real courage, Lucas. More than most grown men have." A nurse entered to check vitals. She smiled softly at Lucas. "Your grandma's on her way, sweetheart. She'll be here soon." Outside the window, the sky had turned deep orange. Then, a sound, far off at first, like thunder rolling in from a clear sky. Lucas sat up. "Grandpa, do you hear that?" Thomas listened. His eyes narrowed, then widened slightly. He knew that sound. He'd heard it years ago when riders escorted his buddy's casket home from the war. The rumble grew louder, closer. Nurses gathered at the windows. Patients in the hallway craned their necks. Then they appeared. Dozens of motorcycles turning into the hospital parking lot in perfect formation. Headlights cutting through the dusk. Engines growling like protective beasts. 43 bikes. 43 riders. They parked in neat rows, engines cutting off one by one until silence fell, broken only by the desert wind. Bear dismounted first, his boots hitting the ground with purpose. He walked straight through the emergency room doors, the rest following in a quiet, powerful wave. The receptionist looked up, startled by the wall of leather and ink approaching. "I'm here to see Thomas Harlan," Bear said calmly. "Tell him the brothers have arrived." What happened when these riders finally met Thomas? And Lucas would shake the foundations of a town that thought it knew who the real protectors were. 43 pairs of boots echoed down the sterile hospital hallway like a slow, deliberate drumbeat, turning every head as the riders moved in unison toward room 212. Nurses froze mid-step, doctors paused conversations, and even the beeping monitors seemed quieter in the presence of this unexpected army. Bear led them, his broad shoulders filling the doorway as he knocked gently on the open door. Inside, Thomas Harlan lay propped up in bed, his weathered face pale against the white sheets. Lucas sat beside him, small hand still gripping his grandfather's. Both looked up, and for a moment, time stood still. Thomas's eyes, sharp despite the pain meds, took in the leather vests, the patches, the scars, and the quiet respect in every man's posture. He had seen formations like this before. Only back then they wore uniforms and carried rifles in faraway deserts. Who are you fellas?" Thomas asked, his voice rough but steady. Bear removed his riding gloves slowly, then his sunglasses, revealing eyes that had seen too much but still held kindness. He stepped forward and knelt beside the bed, so he was eye level with both Thomas and Lucas. "Name's Bear Ramirez, sir. United States Marine Corps. 2004 to 2012. Afghanistan." He placed a large hand gently over his heart. "These are my brothers. We heard what happened to you today. A Navy vet, a grandfather, attacked in a parking lot in front of his boy. We couldn't sit idle." Thomas blinked, emotion tightening his throat. You came all this way for me?" Bear glanced at Lucas, whose wide eyes were fixed on him. "We came for both of you. Any man who served his family, any man who gets hurt just for loading lumber while spending time with his grandson, deserves to know the Brotherhood still stands." Lucas whispered, barely audible, "Are you angels?" A soft chuckle rippled through the riders crowded in the doorway and hallway. Bear smiled, the kind of genuine warm smile that transformed his rugged face. "Not angels, little man," he said softly. "Just men on motorcycles who believe some things are still worth standing up for." He reached out and carefully ruffled Lucas's hair. "You were real brave today, staying with your grandpa. That's the kind of courage most people only talk about." Lucas's lip trembled, but I couldn't stop them. They hurt him bad. Bear's voice dropped, gentle but firm. "Nobody expects an 8-year-old to fight 4 grown men. You did the right thing. You got help. And now, we're here to make sure they understand that actions have consequences." Thomas tried to sit up straighter, wincing. "Listen, I appreciate this more than you know, but the kid who did it, his father's Garrett Callahan, owns half the land around here, bankrolls the sheriff, the mayor. You name it. You get involved, you'll bring trouble on yourselves." Bear stood slowly, his expression turning to stone. "With respect, sir, trouble's already here. It's lying in this bed with cracked ribs and a concussion. It's sitting right there shaking because he watched his hero get hurt. We are just here to balance the scales." He turned to the nurse who had followed them nervously. "When can Mr. Harlan go home?" "Tomorrow morning, if his vitals stay stable," she answered, glancing at the wall of bikers with a mix of awe and caution. Bear nodded. "Good. We'll have people outside all night. No one comes near this room who shouldn't." Thomas shook his head weakly. "You don't have to." "We do," Bear cut in gently. "And we want to." He looked at Lucas again. "Hey partner, you hungry? We've got some guys grabbing pizza for everyone on this floor. Pepperoni okay?" Lucas managed a tiny nod, eyes still huge. As the riders filed out respectfully, 6 stayed behind in the hallway, quiet sentinels rotating shifts through the night. Nurses brought them coffee without being asked. One elderly patient in a nearby room asked a rider to pray with him. Another veteran down the hall saluted as they passed. Inside the room, Lucas finally fell asleep, curled against his grandfather's side. Thomas stared at the ceiling, tears slipping silently into his silver hair. For the first time since the fall, he didn't feel alone. But across town, in a sprawling ranch house on the hill, Bryce Callahan was laughing with his friends over beers, replaying the video on his phone, completely unaware that 43 motorcycles had just declared that his free pass had officially expired. And tomorrow morning, when Thomas walked out of that hospital, the real reckoning would begin. The morning sun painted the Arizona desert in shades of gold and crimson as Thomas Harlan took his first careful steps out of the hospital doors, leaning on a new cane the nurses had given him. Lucas walked right beside him, holding his other hand tightly, while Grandma Ellen, Thomas's wife of 50 years, supported his elbow, her eyes still red from a night of worry. Waiting in the parking lot was a sight that stopped them in their tracks. 43 motorcycles sat in perfect rows, engines idling low and steady like a heartbeat. The riders stood at attention beside their bikes, helmets tucked under arms, faces serious but kind. Bear stood front and center, a small smile breaking through when he saw Lucas wave shyly. "Morning, sir," Bear said, stepping forward to offer his arm for support. "Your chariot awaits." Thomas looked at his old Ford pickup, then back at the sea of chrome and leather. "You're escorting us home?" "All the way," Bear confirmed, "and then we've got some business to take care of." Thomas hesitated, glancing at Ellen. She squeezed his arm and nodded, tears shining. "Let them, Tom. For once, let someone stand with you." Lucas tugged Bear's vest. "Can I ride with you?" Bear chuckled deeply. "Not today, partner. Safety first, but you'll be right behind me in Grandpa's truck. Best seat in the house." The convoy formed effortlessly, 6 bikes in front, Thomas's pickup in the middle with 2 bikes flanking it like guards, and the rest bringing up the rear. As they pulled out of the hospital lot, heads turned everywhere. Patients at windows, staff in the doorway, even the security guards saluted. The roar of 43 Harleys rolling through Dusty Ridge was unlike anything the town had ever heard. People stepped out of diners and shops, phones raised, mouths open. At stop signs, strangers waved. A group of kids on bikes cheered from the sidewalk. An old veteran outside the VFW post stood and placed his hand over his heart as they passed. Thomas watched it all through the windshield, emotion thick in his throat. "Never thought I'd have a parade in my honor," he said quietly. Ellen reached over and held his hand. "You deserve it, love, more than you know." Lucas pressed his face to the window, grinning ear to ear. "Grandpa, they're protecting us." And they were. When they reached the modest ranch house on the edge of town, white paint peeling slightly, American flag flying proudly, the riders circled the driveway and killed their engines. The sudden silence felt sacred. Ellen stepped onto the porch first, wiping tears as she looked at the wall of riders. "I don't know how to thank you all." Bear dismounted and walked up the steps. "Ma'am, your husband served. That makes him family. And family takes care of each other." He turned to Thomas. "We've got work to do today. Security footage, witness statements, medical reports. Things the police suddenly can't seem to find. We'll find them." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "The Callahans will fight dirty." Bear's smile was calm steel. "They can try, but they're about to learn that some things can't be bought." As Thomas settled into his recliner inside, Bear gathered his brothers on the lawn. Quiet conversations turned to plans. Phones came out again. A retired judge owed a favor. A journalist in Phoenix was already interested. And most importantly, a lawyer named Carla Reyes, known for taking on powerful families, was driving in from Tucson. But the riders weren't relying on the system alone. That evening, Bryce Callahan and his 3 friends would be at their usual spot, a high-end bar called the Cactus Lounge, owned by Bryce's uncle. They'd be celebrating how quickly the old man incident was disappearing, posts deleted, witnesses silent, police report rewritten to say Thomas slipped on gravel. They had no idea that 43 motorcycles were about to park outside. And when those doors opened, Bryce's world of invincibility would crack right in front of everyone he wanted to impress. The neon cactus sign of the Cactus Lounge glowed green and pink against the desert night, casting colored shadows over the packed parking lot filled with luxury trucks and sports cars. Inside, the air was thick with expensive cologne, loud laughter, and the clink of overpriced cocktails. Bryce Callahan held court at the corner booth, surrounded by his 3 friends and a circle of admirers, replaying the slowed-down video of Thomas falling on his phone for the 10th time that night. "Look at this fossil-eat pavement," Bryce howled, zooming in on Thomas's head hitting the ground. The table erupted in drunken cheers. "Bet the old man won't park in my spot again." One of his friends raised a glass. "To never facing consequences." They clinked glasses, oblivious to the low vibration that had just begun to rattle the windows. At first it sounded like distant thunder. Then it grew, steady, powerful, undeniable. Glasses on the bar started to tremble. The bass from the speakers was drowned out. Conversations faltered as every head turned toward the huge front windows. Then they saw it. 43 motorcycles rolling into the parking lot in perfect formation, headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Engines growled in unison as they parked side by side, blocking every exit. The riders dismounted slowly. No rushing, no shouting, just calm, deliberate movements that carried more weight than any threat. Inside, the music kept playing, but no one was dancing anymore. The bartender reached for the phone under the counter. A waitress whispered, "Are we about to get robbed?" Bryce's smirk faded. He recognized some of those vests from around town. "Just some biker trash," he muttered, but his voice wavered. Bear walked in first, boots heavy on the polished wood floor. The rest followed in a wave that filled half the bar without a single raised voice. They didn't spread out aggressively. They simply stood, present, immovable. The room went dead silent except for the jukebox skipping to the next song. Bear's eyes scanned until they locked on Bryce. He walked straight to the booth, the crowd parting like water. Bryce tried to lean back casually. "This is a private establishment, you can't just..." Bear raised one hand calmly. The bartender froze with the phone halfway to his ear. "We're not here for trouble," Bear said, voice low but carrying to every corner. "We're here for a conversation." He pulled out a chair uninvited and sat across from Bryce, close enough that Bryce could see the faint scar running through Bear's left eyebrow, a reminder of a roadside bomb in Kandahar. "You put your hands on a 74-year-old Navy veteran yesterday," Bear began quietly. "You shoved him to the ground in front of his 8-year-old grandson. Then you laughed about it, filmed it, posted it." Bryce forced a laugh. "I don't know what you're talking about. Old guy slipped. Ask the cops, they closed the case." Bear reached into his vest slowly and placed a USB drive on the table. "This has the original security footage from the hardware store, full version before anyone edited it. Medical reports detailing cracked ribs and concussion. Signed witness statements from 4 people who were too scared to talk yesterday. And a copy of the video your friend posted before it mysteriously disappeared." Bryce's friends shifted uncomfortably. One tried to stand, only to find 2 riders now standing quietly behind the booth, not touching, just there. Bear continued, voice steady. "Tomorrow morning, all of this goes to the state attorney, every major news station in Arizona, and every social media platform on the planet. Your name, your face, your father's name. The whole world will see exactly what kind of man you are." Bryce's face drained of color. "You're blackmailing me." "No," Bear said firmly. "We're giving you a choice. You walk into the sheriff's office tomorrow by noon. You confess to assault. You apologize in person to Thomas Harlan and his family. You accept whatever the court decides, or we release everything. And trust me, your father's money can bury a police report, but it can't bury a story this big. Not when the whole country's watching a little boy cry over his bleeding grandfather." Bryce tried to sneer, but it came out shaky. "You think you scare me? My dad will have your whole club shut down." Bear leaned in closer. "Your dad isn't here, and right now 43 of my brothers are. We didn't come to hurt you. We came to remind you that real strength isn't pushing down an old man who can't fight back. Real strength is owning what you did." He stood slowly. "Noon tomorrow. Your choice." The riders turned and walked out as quietly as they'd entered. Engines roared to life outside, then faded into the night like rolling thunder moving on, but leaving the promise of rain behind. Bryce sat frozen, staring at the USB drive. His friends wouldn't meet his eyes. The entire bar watched him in silence. For the first time in his life, Bryce Callahan felt small. And across town in a quiet ranch house, Lucas slept peacefully, knowing his grandpa was safe, never imagining that tomorrow, the man who hurt his hero might walk through their front door to say sorry. The clock on the Dusty Ridge Sheriff's Office wall ticked past 11:45 a.m., and the small lobby was empty except for the deputy behind the counter scrolling on his phone. Suddenly, the front door opened, letting in a blast of hot desert air, and Bryce Callahan walked in alone. No designer sunglasses, no cocky smirk, no entourage, just a 22-year-old man in a plain t-shirt and jeans, shoulders slumped, eyes red from a sleepless night. The deputy looked up, stunned. Everyone in town knew Bryce. Can I help you?" Bryce's voice came out hoarse. "I'm here to confess to assault. Yesterday at the hardware store parking lot, I pushed Thomas Harlan, an elderly veteran, to the ground. I want to turn myself in." The deputy's mouth actually fell open. He fumbled for the right forms. You sure about this, Bryce? You want a lawyer?" "No," Bryce said quietly. "I don't want anyone fixing this for me anymore." Words spread faster than a brush fire in dry season. By noon, the local diner was buzzing. By 1 o'clock, the story hit the county Facebook groups. By 3, a Phoenix news station had a crew on the way. Son of wealthy landowner confesses to assaulting Navy veteran after motorcycle club intervention. But the story wasn't about revenge. It was about a young man finally facing himself. Back at the Harlan ranch house, Thomas sat on the porch swing with Lucas building a model airplane on the steps. Ellen was inside making lemonade when her phone started blowing up with messages. She stepped out, eyes wide. "Tom, Bryce Callahan just walked into the sheriff's office and confessed. Everything. They're charging him." Thomas froze, glue brush in hand. Lucas looked up. "The bad man said sorry?" "Not yet," Thomas replied slowly. "But he's owning what he did. That's the first step. If you're feeling the weight of this moment like I am, pause right now and subscribe to Road Motorcycle Diaries. We share these real stories of redemption, courage, and the unbreakable bonds between people who choose to do what's right. Turn on the bell so you never miss one." That same afternoon, Bear and 6 riders pulled up to the Harlan home again, this time without the full convoy. Bear carried a large envelope. "We come bearing gifts," he said with a grin, handing it to Thomas. Inside were printed copies of the confession, the unedited security footage, witness statements, and a letter from the state prosecutor confirming charges would be filed. No more disappearing evidence. Thomas's eyes misted over. "You did all this in one day?" "We had help," Bear admitted. "But mostly Bryce did it to himself. He chose." Lucas ran up to Bear, holding out his finished crayon drawing. Stick figure motorcycles surrounding a house with a big heart over it. "For you," Lucas said proudly. Bear knelt down, taking it like it was made of gold. "This is going on the wall at the garage, little man, front and center." As the riders prepared to leave, Thomas stood, slowly, painfully, and extended his hand. "I don't have words big enough. You gave me back something I thought this world had taken away, faith in people." Bear shook his hand firmly, then pulled him into a careful hug. "You never lost it, sir. You just reminded the rest of us where to find it." Months later, the court sentenced Bryce to 18 months probation, 400 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and most meaningfully, participation in a veteran mentorship program at the local VFW, where Thomas Harlan volunteered every Tuesday. Their first meeting was scheduled for the following week. Would a man who once laughed at an elder's pain be able to look that same man in the eye and say sorry? And could Thomas find it in his heart to forgive? That meeting would change both of their lives forever. If this story of accountability and hope has moved you, smash that like button. Drop a comment telling us, would you have had the courage to confess like Bryce did in the end? And subscribe to Road Motorcycle Diaries with notifications on. We've got 4 more parts coming that will restore your faith in humanity even more. The VFW hall in Dusty Ridge smelled of fresh coffee, old wood, and the faint trace of cigar smoke from decades past. Every Tuesday afternoon, a group of veterans gathered in the back room, some in wheelchairs, some with canes, all with stories etched into their faces. They shared coffee, played cards, fixed radios for widows, and mentored younger vets struggling to come home. Today, though, the room felt different. Thomas Harlan arrived early, moving slowly but steadily with his new cane. He wore his old Navy cap, the one with the Desert Storm ribbon, faded but proud. Lucas had wanted to come, but Thomas gently told him this was grown-up talking time. Ellen dropped him off with a kiss on the cheek and a quiet, "Be the man I know you are." Thomas took his usual seat at the long table, greeting his buddies with handshakes and quiet jokes, but his eyes kept drifting to the door. At exactly 2 p.m. the door opened. Bryce Callahan stepped inside, alone. He wore plain work boots, jeans, and a simple grey shirt. No watch, no jewelry, no attitude. His hair was cut shorter than usual, and his face carried the weight of sleepless nights. He carried a small folder in his hands like a shield. The room went quiet. 10 pairs of veteran eyes turned toward him. No one spoke. Bryce's gaze found Thomas immediately. He walked straight to him, stopping a few feet away. "Mr. Harlan," he began, voice cracking on the second syllable. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Mr. Harlan, may I sit?" Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward the empty chair across the table. "Sit." Bryce sat. The folder trembled slightly in his hands. He opened it and slid out a single sheet of paper, a handwritten letter. "I wrote this last night," he said quietly. "I'm supposed to read it out loud as part of my program." He looked around the room. "But I'd like to read it to you first, sir, if that's okay." Thomas nodded once. Bryce took a deep breath and began. "Mr. Harlan, my name is Bryce Callahan. On that day in the parking lot, I took something from you that I can never give back. I hurt you physically. I scared your grandson. I laughed about it afterward like it was nothing. I've spent my whole life being told I was special because of my last name. People fixed my mistakes. Doors opened without me knocking. I started to believe I was above consequences, above respect, above decency. When I pushed you, I wasn't just pushing an old man. I was pushing everything good men like you fought for. Honor, kindness, protecting the people you love. I am deeply, truly sorry. Not because I got caught, not because of pressure, but because I finally see the kind of man I was becoming, and I hate him. I know sorry doesn't fix cracked ribs. It doesn't erase the fear in Lucas's eyes. But I promise you, on everything I have left, I will spend every day trying to become someone who deserves forgiveness. Someone who stands up instead of knocking others down. Thank you for your service, and thank you for letting me sit here today. Bryce Callahan." His voice broke completely on the last line. He folded the letter carefully and slid it across the table to Thomas. Tears fell freely now, silent, unashamed. The room remained still. Thomas picked up the letter, read it again silently. Then he looked up, not with anger, but with something deeper. "Why did you do it, son?" Thomas asked softly. Bryce wiped his eyes. "Because no one ever told me no, because I thought power meant never having to say sorry, because I was empty inside and hurting people made me feel full for a second. I know how pathetic that sounds now." Thomas nodded slowly. "Takes guts to say that out loud." He leaned forward, wincing slightly at the pull on his ribs. "Bryce, I'm not gonna lie. What you did was wrong, dead wrong, and it hurt more than my body. It hurt my heart, thinking the world had gotten so cold that a man can't load lumber with his grandson without fear. But here's the thing I learned a long time ago in the Navy. People aren't born heroes or villains. They choose every day which one they're gonna be. You made a terrible choice that day, but walking in here today, reading that letter, that's a good choice. and good choices can change everything. Bryce looked up, hope flickering for the first time. Thomas extended his hand across the table. I forgive you, son. Not because it's easy, but because carrying hate is heavier than any cane I'll ever need, and because I believe people can change, if they're willing to do the work. Bryce stared at the offered hand like it was made of gold. Then he grasped it firmly, tears streaming again. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. The other veterans in the room, one by one, nodded approval. One old Marine clapped Bryce on the shoulder as he stood. Welcome to the program, kid. We'll keep you honest. Over the next months, Bryce showed up every Tuesday without fail. He listened to stories of war, loss, and coming home. He fixed wheelchairs, painted walls, served coffee, and slowly, week by week, he began to change, from the inside out. But the biggest change was yet to come, at a charity ride that would bring the entire town together under one roaring sky. The morning of the annual Desert Thunder charity ride dawned clear and crisp, the kind of Arizona day where the sky stretches forever and the red rocks glow like fire. Over 200 motorcycles gathered at the fairgrounds on the edge of Dusty Ridge. Harleys, Indians, custom choppers, even a few vintage bikes restored with loving hands. Flags snapped in the breeze, American flags, POW, MIA flags, and one massive banner reading, Ride for Our Veterans. This year's ride was bigger than ever. Word had spread across the state about what happened in Dusty Ridge, about a veteran attacked, a little boy's tears, a motorcycle club that stood up, and a young man who found redemption. Donations were pouring in before the engines even started. Thomas, Harlan, Ellen, and Lucas arrived early as guests of honor. Lucas, now sporting a tiny custom leather vest Bear had made just for him, complete with a patch that read Future Brother, bounced with excitement as he ran between the rows of shining bikes. Bear spotted them and strode over, helmet under one arm. There's our VIPs, he said, scooping Lucas up onto his shoulders. Ready to lead the pack, little man? Lucas grinned wider than the desert horizon. Yes, sir. Thomas walked slower, but his step had strength again. The ribs had healed. The deeper wounds were healing too. He shook Bear's hand firmly. Never thought I'd be the reason for all this. You're not the reason, Bear replied. You're the reminder of why we ride, why we stand. At the starting line, Bear took the microphone in front of the huge crowd. Riders, families, townspeople who had come out to watch. Today we ride for every man and woman who put on the uniform, he began, voice booming over the speakers. We ride for Thomas Harlan, a Navy veteran who taught us that honor doesn't retire. We ride for his grandson Lucas, who showed us courage comes in small packages, but leaves big footprints. And we ride for every kid who needs to see that good people still stand up when others look away. The crowd cheered. Cameras flashed. Local news crews filmed. Then Bear's voice softened. And today, we also ride for someone who made a mistake, but chose to make it right. Bryce Callahan, come on up here. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. Bryce stood near the back, unsure if he belonged. He'd been working quietly behind the scenes for months, organizing donations, cleaning bikes, helping veterans with yard work. But being called forward? That was new. Thomas spotted him and waved him over with a warm smile. Get up here, son. You earned this. Bryce walked to the front, head high but humble. He took the mic when Bear handed it to him. I don't have fancy words, Bryce started, voice steady but emotional. A year ago, I was the kind of person who hurt people and thought it made me strong. Mr. Harlan, Lucas, this whole town, you all gave me a mirror I couldn't look away from. And then you gave me a chance to change. I'm not fixed, I've still got a long road. But today, riding with all of you, it's the proudest I've ever felt. Thank you for letting me be part of something bigger than myself. He handed the mic back to Bear and stepped aside to thunderous applause. Not mocking, but genuine. People who once whispered about him now nodded with respect. The signal was given. Engines roared to life in a symphony that shook the ground. 200 bikes pulled out in perfect formation, led by Bear with Lucas riding in a sidecar attached to his Harley, waving like a prince. Thomas and Ellen followed in their truck, right behind the lead pack. Bryce rode near the middle, his own bike now sporting a simple veteran support patch he'd earned through service. The route wound through red canyons, past saguaro forests, along highways where truckers honked in salute and families lined the roads waving flags. At every stoplight in small towns along the way, people cheered. By sunset, they returned to the fairgrounds for a massive barbecue. Live music played. Kids ran around with balloon animals. Veterans told stories around fire pits. Lucas found Bryce sitting alone for a moment, watching the crowd. "Hey," Lucas said shyly, holding out a new crayon drawing. This one showed Bryce on a motorcycle next to Grandpa, both smiling. Bryce took it carefully. "This is incredible, buddy. Thank you." Lucas hugged him suddenly. "Grandpa says you're good now." Bryce hugged back, eyes shining. "I'm trying to be." Thomas walked up and placed a hand on Bryce's shoulder. "You're doing more than trying. You're doing." As the stars came out over the desert, Bear found Thomas by the main stage. "You changed lives this year, Thomas. More than you know." Thomas shook his head. "We all did. Together. But one more chapter remained, one that would bring everything full circle, back to the place where it all began." The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall cottonwood trees behind the Harlan ranch house, casting golden patches on the half-finished treehouse perched 10 feet up in the sturdy branches. Hammers rang out in steady rhythm, mixed with laughter and the occasional shout of instruction. Lucas, now 11 years old and a full head taller, stood on the wooden platform, passing nails to his grandfather. Thomas Harlan, at 77, moved with the same careful determination he'd always had, but his eyes sparkled brighter than they had in years. His ribs had long healed, but the cane still leaned against the trunk below, just in case. "Hand me that 2x4, partner," Thomas called. "We're finally putting in that secret trapdoor you wanted." Lucas grinned, hauling the board up the ladder. "The one with the rope ladder that rolls down?" "The very same, just like we planned that day." That day. They both knew which one he meant. The day that was supposed to be about buying wood for a treehouse, but turned into something so much bigger. Below them on the ground, Bear Ramirez steadied the ladder, passing up tools. He'd become a regular fixture at the Harlan home, showing up on weekends to help with projects, teach Lucas how to change oil on the old Ford, or just sit on the porch telling stories with Thomas about deserts far away from this one. Bryce Callahan was there too, holding a level against the frame, checking for plumb. 3 years had changed him deeply. The cocky richness was gone, replaced by quiet confidence earned through hard work. He'd finished his probation, paid restitution, and kept showing up long after the court required it. He'd started a small landscaping business that employed veterans transitioning back to civilian life, and every month he donated a portion to the local VFW. "Look straight," Bryce said, stepping back. "We're good to nail it in." Thomas climbed down carefully and surveyed their work. The treehouse now had 2 levels, windows with real glass, a slanted roof to keep out the rain, and even solar-powered string lights Lucas had begged for. "It's perfect," Thomas said, voice thick. "Better than I ever imagined." Lucas scrambled down and hugged his grandpa tight. "We did it, Grandpa, just like you promised." Bear ruffled Lucas's hair. "You two did most of the work. We were just the muscle." Bryce smiled softly. "I'm honored to be part of it." Ellen came out of the house carrying a tray of lemonade and cookies, followed by several other riders who'd shown up to help finish the final touches. The yard filled with easy conversation and laughter, the kind that comes when people have walked through fire together and come out stronger. Later, as the sun began to set, they all sat on the porch. Lucas pulled out his old crayon drawings, the ones he'd given Bear and Bryce years ago, and laid them on the table. "I found these in my room," he said. "Thought we could hang them inside the treehouse." Bear's eyes misted as he picked up the faded picture of motorcycles surrounding a house with a heart. "These are treasures, little man." Bryce held the one Lucas had given him at the charity ride, the one with both him and Thomas smiling on bikes. "I still have mine framed in my office," he admitted quietly. "Reminds me every day who I want to be." Thomas looked around at the group, his wife, his grandson, the men in leather who had become family, and the young man who had once been his enemy, but was now like a son. "I used to think the world was getting harder," Thomas said softly, "meaner, but sitting here with all of you, I know different now. There are still people who stand up, who forgive, who show up, and that's enough to keep the good alive." Bear raised his glass of lemonade. "To family, not just the one you're born with, but the one you choose." Everyone clinked glasses. That night, after everyone left, Thomas and Lucas climbed into the finished treehouse with flashlights. They sat on the floor, looking out at the stars through the open window. "Grandpa," Lucas whispered, "tell me the story again, about the day the thunder came." Thomas smiled in the dark. "I've told you that story 100 times, kiddo." "I know, but it's my favorite." Thomas pulled his grandson close. "Well, it started on a day when I thought kindness might be gone from the world. Then a little boy ran into a store crying for help, and everything changed." As Thomas retold the story, every detail, every emotion, Lucas listened with the same wide-eyed wonder he'd had at 8. And somewhere in the distance, carried on the warm desert wind, came the faint, familiar rumble of motorcycles, riding the night roads, keeping watch, keeping promises, reminding the world that brotherhood never ends. But tomorrow would bring one final moment that would close the circle completely, right back where it all began. The bell over the hardware store door chimed exactly like it had 6 years earlier, a bright, familiar jingle that made everyone inside turn with a smile. The smell of sawdust, fresh paint, and coffee hadn't changed a bit. Dusty Ridge Hardware still stood as the heart of the small town, shelves stocked high, radio playing classic country low in the background. But today was different. Thomas Harlan, now 80 years old, walked through that door holding the hand of 14-year-old Lucas, tall, strong, and wearing the same proud grin he'd had as a little boy. Behind them came Ellen, Bear Ramirez, Bryce Callahan, and a dozen other riders in their vests, all carrying toolboxes, paint cans, and rolls of lumber. The store owner, Mr. Jenkins, an older man who had witnessed the original incident from his office window, stood frozen behind the counter, eyes wide. "Thomas, what in the world is all this?" Thomas smiled warmly. "We're here to finish what we started, Jenkins. Way back when Lucas was 8, we came in to buy wood for a treehouse. Got interrupted. Today, we're buying enough to build 10. Lucas stepped forward, holding up a folded blueprint, this one professionally drawn, complete with measurements and elevations. "We're starting a program," he explained, voice clear and confident. "Tree houses for veterans' families, places where grandkids and grandpas can make memories up high, away from the world for a little while. Safe spots, happy spots." Bear nodded beside him. "The club's funding the materials. Bryce's landscaping company is donating labor. Lucas here designed the first model himself," Bryce added quietly, "and I'm matching every donation dollar for dollar, for as long as it takes." Mr. Jenkins's eyes filled with tears. He came around the counter and hugged Thomas tightly. "I never forgot that day," he whispered. "I was too scared to speak up then. I'm proud to help now." The group spent the afternoon loading carts. Cedar planks, galvanized nails, roofing shingles, buckets of weatherproof stain. Employees helped carry everything out, some wiping away tears, others taking photos. Outside in the parking lot, the same asphalt where Thomas once lay bleeding, Lucas stopped and looked around. The spot between the two faded parking lines was now marked with a small bronze plaque embedded in the concrete. No one had noticed it until now. It read, "In honor of courage in small packages and brotherhood that thunders when needed. On this spot, a little boy asked for help, and the world answered. We take care of our own. Dusty Ridge, forever." Lucas knelt and touched the letters, tracing them with his finger. Thomas stood beside him, hand on his shoulder. "You did this?" Lucas asked Bear. Bear shook his head. "The whole town pitched in quietly. Wanted you both to find it together." Thomas's voice was thick. "Never thought I'd stand here again and feel only gratitude." As they loaded the last of the lumber into a long trailer hitched to Bear's truck, Lucas turned to the group. "Family by blood and family by choice. This isn't the end," he said. "It's the beginning." Grandpa always told me that being good isn't about the bike you ride or the patches you wear. It's about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. It's about forgiving when it's hard. It's about showing up. Today we're showing up. For every veteran, every grandkid, every person who needs to know they're not alone. The riders revved their engines gently. Not a roar, but a warm, steady rumble of agreement. Thomas looked at Bryce, at Bear, at Lucas, at Ellen. Then he looked up at the wide Arizona sky. I started that day thinking the world had forgotten kindness, he said softly. But kindness didn't forget us. It just needed a little thunder to remind everyone it was still here. They pulled out of the parking lot in a small convoy, trucks loaded with hope, motorcycles gleaming in the sun. People on the sidewalk waved and cheered, knowing the story, living the legacy. And somewhere down the road, a new treehouse was already rising, built by hands that once hurt and hands that once healed side by side. Because in the end, that's what real strength looks like, not in pushing someone down. The Callahan Ranch house sat high on the hill overlooking Dusty Ridge, its massive windows glowing like watchful eyes against the black desert night. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the kind that builds when words have been avoided for too long. Garrett Callahan, Bryce's father, a tall, silver-haired man in his late 50s, whose name was on half the buildings in town, sat in his leather armchair by the fireplace, nursing a glass of expensive scotch. His face was stone, but his knuckles were white around the crystal. Bryce stood in the doorway of the study, hands in his pockets, heart pounding harder than it had the night the motorcycles parked outside the bar. It was 2 days after his confession at the sheriff's office. The news had hit every channel, every social media feed. Wealthy heir turns himself in after motorcycle club ultimatum. Garrett's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Business partners pulling out, sponsors reconsidering, old friends suddenly busy. Garrett finally spoke, voice low and cold. "Do you have any idea what you've done? To this family? To my name?" Bryce took a slow breath and stepped fully into the room. "I know exactly what I did, Dad. Both times. What I did to Mr. Harlan, and what I just did by confessing." Garrett slammed the glass down, amber liquid sloshing. "You let a bunch of grease monkey bikers intimidate you. I could have buried this. One call to the DA, one to the sheriff. Gone. Like every other mistake you've made. But no, you had to play hero. You had to grow a conscience at the worst possible moment." Bryce flinched, but he didn't look away. "That's the thing, Dad. They weren't mistakes you fixed. They were choices I made. Bad ones. And you kept erasing the consequences so I never had to feel them. Every DUI, every fight, every time I treated people like they were beneath me, you made it disappear. And I let you, because it was easier than looking at who I was becoming." Garrett stood, towering over his son. "You think you're better than me now? Because you cried on TV and said sorry to some old sailor? This family didn't build an empire by apologizing. We built it by winning." Bryce's voice stayed steady, even as his hands trembled. "I thought winning meant never losing, never having to say I was wrong. But watching Mr. Harlan forgive me, watching that little kid Lucas still believe people can be good after what I did to his grandpa, that's winning, Dad. That's something money can't buy." Garrett laughed bitterly. "And what about us? Your mother hasn't slept since this broke. Investors are pulling out of the new development. Do you think forgiveness pays the bills?" Bryce stepped closer, eyes burning with tears he refused to let fall. "No, but it pays something more important. It pays for a life I can actually look at in the mirror. I'm tired, Dad. Tired of being the guy who hurts people and hides behind you. Tired of thinking power means stepping on others. I want to be someone Lucas can look up to one day, someone Mr. Harlan respects, someone I respect." Garrett stared at him, the anger slowly cracking into something raw, pain, fear, maybe even recognition. "You think I wanted you to be weak," Garrett said, voice breaking for the first time. "I gave you everything so you'd never have to scrape and beg like I did growing up. I protected you because I love you, damn it." Bryce's throat tightened. "I know you love me, but love isn't just fixing problems. Sometimes love is letting someone fall so they learn how to stand. You never let me fall, Dad, so I never learned how to get back up. Until those bikers stood in that bar and gave me no choice but to face myself. Silence stretched between them, heavy as the desert heat. Garrett sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older. "What do you want from me, Bryce?" Bryce knelt in front of his father, the same way Bear had once knelt to speak to Lucas, and took his hand. "I want you to let me do this my way. No lawyers trying to reduce the sentence. No calling in favors. Let me finish the community service. Let me keep showing up at the VFW. Let me earn back trust the hard way. And I want you to come with me one Tuesday. Just sit in the back. Listen to those veterans talk. Hear what real strength sounds like." Garrett pulled his hand away, but not angrily. He stared into the fireplace, flames dancing in his eyes. "I built all this," he whispered, gesturing at the grand room, the land beyond the windows. "And my own son thinks I'm the villain." Bryce shook his head. "I don't think you're a villain. I think you're a dad who wanted to protect his kid so much he forgot to teach him how to protect himself or others. But it's not too late for either of us." Garrett didn't answer for a long time. Finally, he drained the rest of his scotch and stood. "I need to think," he said gruffly, walking past Bryce toward the hallway. At the door, he paused without turning around. "Your mother's making breakfast tomorrow. Be here at 8. We'll talk more then." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't understanding. But it was a door cracked open. Bryce sat alone in the study for a long time after his father left. He pulled out his phone and opened the photo Lucas had drawn for him years ago, the one now framed in his small apartment. 2 stick figures on motorcycles, one big, one small, riding side by side with a heart in the sky. He whispered to the empty room, "I'm trying, buddy. I'm really trying." Weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Garrett Callahan slipped into the back of the VFW hall. He wore a plain button-down shirt, no watch, no rings. He sat in the shadows and listened as Thomas told a story about a young sailor in Desert Storm who learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're terrified. Garrett didn't speak to anyone that day. He left before coffee was served. But the next Tuesday, he was there again. And the Tuesday after that. Slowly, silently, he began bringing donuts, then helping move tables, then asking quiet questions about PTSD, resources for a friend. No one made a fuss. No one needed to. Because redemption isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just showing up, week after week, until the person you were starts to fade and the person you're becoming takes root. And in a small desert town, under wide open skies, a father and son began walking the long road back to each other, one quiet step at a time. But in helping them stand back up, and then building something beautiful together. If this story moved you the way it moved me, if it reminded you that courage, forgiveness, loyalty, and love still win, then please hit that like button. Leave a comment telling us, have you ever witnessed or been part of a moment when strangers became family? And subscribe to Road Motorcycle Diaries with the bell turned on. We're here every week sharing true stories that prove the good in humanity is louder than the bad when we choose to listen. Thank you for riding this 10-part journey with us. Until next time, keep the faith, stand strong, and always take care of your own.